Okay, as our final discussion on emotions and attitudes in workplace motivation, we're going to talk about organizational justice perceptions. And again, this kind of came out of equity theory when we were looking at the impact on people's perceptions of how equitable their treatment by the organization is in a factor of their inputs versus outputs to the remainder of the people. And generally speaking, because equity theory is highly reliant on people's perceptions of equity, that's what kind of resulted into a further discussion of what exactly does that look like as far as an attitude. So justice perceptions are very important. Employees' judgments about whether their work situation is fair is what we're talking about when we talk about justice. So it's a general concept of how fair is their treatment at workplace. Justice perceptions in organizations have been found to be correlated moderately with job satisfaction. So again, if you perceive your organization as just and that you're treated fair, you tend to have higher job satisfaction. If you perceive that you're being treated unfairly, you have lower job satisfaction. Obviously, organizational commitment, and again, they're highly related actually. Justice perceptions, job satisfaction, and organizational commitment are all interrelated. If you're highly satisfied with your job, if you're relatively highly committed to your organization, you probably also perceive that you're treated justly. If you have low job satisfaction, if you're not committed to your organization, you're probably more likely to be looking for examples of why you're being treated unfairly. So it's not necessarily that justice perceptions results in job satisfaction, or even that job satisfaction results in justice perceptions. Each one of these are influenced by different factors, and they don't have to be directly related. For example, you could love your job, but think that you're treated unfairly. You could be highly committed to an organization, believe it treats you justly, but still hate your job. But each one of them is somewhat influencing the other, kind of in a collaborative way, if you will. Justice perceptions definitely influences job performance, withdrawal behaviors, and counterproductive behaviors. So just like job satisfaction and organizational commitment are somewhat related to these, so is justice perceptions. If you perceive that your organization is justly, you're more likely to perform well in the job, and you're more likely to be motivated to do well. If you perceive that you're being treated unfairly, you're less likely to be putting in effort and to be working harder. Withdrawal behaviors, the more you think you're treated fairly, the more likely you are also trying to treat your organization fairly. So there's kind of a reciprocal relationship occurring. Again, if job perceptions of justice are low, you're much more likely to be doing withdrawal behaviors, which can include being absent, can be missing days, can be showing up late, can also be being on the job but not actually doing performance. In other words, wasting time while there. And finally, counterproductive behavior. So actually trying to sabotage, trying to do employee theft, and basically hurt the organization is also often related to perceptions that there isn't fairness in that organization. There's generally, and different theorists will make arguments that there are slightly different names or different ways to kind of break up justice perceptions, but most research on organizational justice suggests there's kind of three subcategories of overall perceptions of justice. There's distributive justice, which is the perception of fairness of individual outcomes. So basically, distributive justice is, do you believe that the way outcomes are determined in your organization, generally pay, promotion, continuance of work, and bonuses, are they equitable? In other words, do you understand how the outcomes are distributed, and do you believe it's fair? Procedural justice is the perceptions of whether the process used to make the decisions was fair. So again, this is a little bit different, but you can have a situation where you go, well, yes, I agree that so-and-so deserved the promotion. But the fact that they got it simply because they were best friends with the owner, that process doesn't sit well with me. So then there's an example of where you could have distributive justice but not procedural justice. Also, honestly, you can have procedural justice but still be unhappy with the fairness of the actual outcome. So you can understand the process that was used. They used a good process. They did reviews, they used 360s, they actually looked at our overall sales, and they chose the person with the highest sales. But I don't think that outcome is fair, because I don't think they should have been using that particular procedure, or the outcome actually benefited someone that I think shouldn't have got that promotion. So again, these are pretty highly related. Normally, if you have distributive justice, you're probably going to have procedural justice and back and forth. But we can definitely think about situations where they would occur in isolations from each other. And that's why they're worth splitting out. If they always occurred together, we wouldn't need to talk about them separately. We could basically just call it justice. The fact that there are situations where you can be high in one and not the other is why we have these kind of subconstructs. Finally, interactional justice is the perception of whether the organization implements procedures fairly, basically by the way they treat people. So interactional justice is about how the actual information is shared. Is it done through explanation? Is communication solid? And generally speaking, we want an organization to be thinking about how to increase all three of these. Distributive justice, procedural justice, and interactional justice. So how do you make sure that the perceptions of the outcomes are seen as equitable? How do you make sure that people understand the process and endorse the process? And then finally, making sure that you communicate this, because all of this is about perception equals reality. You can have the fairest process that has ever been devised with the best outcomes that really relate directly to quantifiable and measurable traits that are necessary for those outcomes. But if that's not being communicated, if people don't think that they're being treated respectfully, if the decisions are being basically metered out by impersonal emails, all of that falls apart because the interactional justice isn't there. And in fact, interactional justice, I would argue, is the most important part, because you need interactional justice to communicate to people that the procedural justice and the distributive justice is actually there. So distributive justice basically is the rules for allocating resources. So equity, resources are distributed to employees with respect to ability and contributions. Equality, resources are distributed so each person gets the same amount regardless of their contributions. And need, resources are distributed to a person who needs the most. So basically what this is saying is there's three broad rules that you can use for distributing outcomes. Most organizations use equity. They basically try to measure the abilities and contributions and reward the people that are providing the most skills and the most contributions, and rewarding less people that are giving less abilities. So again, if you're a quarterback on a football team, that is one position. You want the very best that's out there, and that's a fairly rare ability set to be able to be a really good quarterback. Therefore, that quarterback is going to make more because of the abilities they have than, say, a linebacker. That's a position that, though still requiring a very rare set of skills, there's a much larger group of people that have that skill set and can do that job. Therefore, they're going to get less contributions. Similarly, if someone is doing quote-unquote fairly simple tasks in an organization, they're doing cleaning tasks, they're doing tasks that were skills learned within a day or two, they're going to be getting much less contributions, much less outcomes than someone that had to spend 4 to 6 years getting very specialized training to be able to do something. So that's equity. Now again, equity does not mean that people are going to perceive that as distributive justice. Many people will complain about how much money professional sports stars make, or how much money actors make, or how much money people that are in the tech sector are making. So even though they might acknowledge, well, yes, that person has a skill set that I don't have, and it is a rare skill set, I'm still upset by the fact that they're making so much more than me. So again, it comes up to an issue of equity and distributive justice. So when using equity, an organization does need to, again, work on how is that perception perceived. Letting people know this is how we actually determine the value of the abilities and therefore the contributions this person's making, and then the reward based on it. Equity simply means that everyone gets the same outcome regardless of their contribution. Now this might sound like a pretty positive way to do it, but generally speaking, equity has a problem that the top producers or the people with high ability skills will often now be the ones that are perceiving injustice. So you're simply shifting an injustice for an injustice, perceptually speaking. So again, someone that believes that they have harder to attain abilities that should be worth more money, and are putting in more contributions to an organization that are making the same outcome as someone that is doing less, is going to view that as a bad set of distributive justice. Some organizations may also consider need resources distributed to the people that need them the most. So again, kind of viewing this fix the squeaky wheels without rewarding the actual successful cogs. I don't know, that was a weird analogy I just came up on the side. But each one of these, regardless of the rules for allocating resources, the organization needs to decide what is the rule that's being used, how are we making these decisions, and then how do we communicate the decisions to try to increase the perceptions of distributive justice in our organization. So distributive justice meets equity theory. Employees do compute a ratio of how much they contribute to an organization and how much they get back. And then employees choose a coworker to compute that ratio as well, to basically make comparisons. When employees then compare those ratios, they react upon the basis of this comparison. An unbalanced ratio creates equity distress, which leads to a variety of responses, including changes of work ethic and quality. So basically what this is suggesting is that if you perceive that you're not being paid as much as you should be, whether it's because you're comparing yourself to someone that is being that makes more, or that you're comparing to someone that makes the same and you think you are doing more, both of those are going to cause equity distress, and both of those are going to result in a reduction generally in motivation and behaviors. Procedural justice is what are some of the things that lead to procedures being seen as fair. So basically, it's not now the rule that's being used to distribute the outcomes, it's the procedure to get to those decisions. And generally speaking, we found a fair amount of information on how to make procedures seem more just. They include voice. So providing voice includes people being able to provide feedback on how the procedures are decided and what decisions are being made. Also, often voice can include providing a system to where if someone disagrees with a performance evaluation or a procedure that is determining an outcome, that they can actually question it, that they can basically go to, and there's a process of review. Really, though, what we're talking about is consistency, bias suppression, and accuracy. So are we actually measuring job-related tasks and performance and competencies? Are we actually getting at what the job entails? Are we making sure to suppress as much as possible potential bias in those decisions? And once we create a procedure, is that procedure being used consistently for everyone? So if we have a really good procedure for determining who actually does the most sales, but in 1 month the Salesman of the Month or Salesperson of the Month award goes to not someone who made the most sales, but someone who made an important new client. Well, that might make a lot of sense to management. We want to reward this new client even though the old procedure said it was just total sales and this person is not the highest in total sales. That's breaking consistency. Even though it might be fair, it will be perceived as not following the consistent procedures of the program. So once you establish procedures, you need to communicate them and you need to stick with them. Correctability and ethicality. So are the procedures generally ethical and perceived by ethical within the norms of the organization, the corporate culture? And finally, can there be correction? And that goes back to that voice part of if there's a mistake, is there a process for someone to question the mistake and have it re-reviewed? So when is procedural justice most important? Generally speaking, people don't care about procedural justice when they're getting good outcomes. So if you are that person that got Salesperson of the Month for getting a big client in, even though it kind of broke the procedure, you're not going to care. You're going to be pretty happy with the organization because you got the reward. Where procedural justice matters most is when people actually do not get the reward they expect. So take a look at this, and this is based on a fair amount of meta-analyses actually looking at procedural justice. This is from a particular study, but we find this pattern over and over again. The outcome favorability is the bottom, low or high. So low means you didn't get the promotion, you didn't get the bonus, you didn't get the recognition you expected. High means that you got it. So when there's high, notice that the response to the organization is generally favorable whether you believe the organization has low or high procedural justice. So if you think the procedure is just, you're happy. If you think the procedure is unjust, you're still happy. You got a good outcome. It's when that outcome is bad, you didn't get the reward, that high procedural justice is a very good mediating factor. It reduces the impact of that negative outcome. So if I understand the procedure, I view it as just, and I know I didn't get the promotion, I'm still going to be relatively favorable to the organization. If I didn't get that promotion and I also think the procedural justice is low, I don't agree with the procedure, I don't think it's just, I'm going to have a very negative reaction to that negative outcome. So finally, interactional justice can be broken up into two components, and this is often where sometimes you'll actually see these as listed as the 4 components of organizational justice. distributive justice, procedural justice, interpersonal, and information. But interpersonal and information tend to be fairly highly related, and many theorists suggest that it's just one broader concept of interactional justice. Interpersonal component is treating people with dignity and respect and refraining from improper remarks or comments. It's basically about making sure, do people perceive that whenever they're being interacted with, either by their subordinates or their supervisors, that that information is being done from a social place, from a positive place, and from a developmental place? Are they being treated well? The second component is, are they actually getting the information they need? So, and again, you can kind of conceive how sometimes you might be treated very well and with respect, but you're never given information. So high interpersonal, but low informational. Interactional justice needs both. It needs the social aspect of treating someone with respect, but also providing explanations for decisions. And that informational component is key to the whole thing. I would say it's the base of the pyramid. It is communicating what are the procedures and how is distribution happening. That information and how it's communicated is really going to determine overall how the person perceives the justice in an organization.